director of the Center for Science, Technology, and Society here at Chulalongkorn University, and it is the honor of the university and for us in general in Thailand to host the 8th International Bioethics, Multiculturalism, and Religion Workshop and Symposium here in Thailand after a long hiatus because of the COVID pandemic. So I would like to invite Kun Somsong Namwong, the Director of the Bureau of International Cooperation, Ministry of Education, Government of Thailand, to different openings. Thank you.
Professor Dr. Alberto Garcia, Director of the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics and Human Rights. Father Joseph Tan, Fellow of the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics and Human Rights. Associate Professor Dr. Suradet Chodurongpan, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Chulalongkorn University. Professor Dr. Solat Ongadalong, Director of the Center for Science, Technology, and Society, Faculty of Arts, Chulalongkorn University. Distinguished speakers and guests, on behalf of the Ministry of Education of Thailand and the Thai National Commission for UNESCO, I am very much honored to be a part of this international workshop and symposium. It is my pleasure to welcome all the experts and academics from around the world, from their fields such as bioethics, philosophy, religions, humanity, history, and public policy. As the Thai National Commission for UNESCO, we have organized various joint activities with UNESCO in Thai, and we are also an active partner with Chulalongkorn University. We are really grateful to have such partnership. This event would not have happened without the cooperation between UNESCO Chair in Bioethics and Human Rights and Chulalongkorn University, especially the support from Associate Professor Dr. Suradet Chodurongpan, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Professor Dr. Salot Ongadalong, the Director of the Center for Science, Technology, and Society, and also the rest of the team from Chulalongkorn University. I believe all the speakers and participants attending this 3-day event will help us better understand the present world that is full of chance and challenge, and provides us the idea to cope with them properly, especially in the aspect of religions and ethics. This will actually pave the way to the future where the being and nature can get along, rely on, and live together to faithfully despite diversity. In closing, I would like to take this opportunity to convey my appreciation to all the participants and honorable guests and speakers of this meaningful event for their participation. I would also like to pay special thanks to the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics and Human Rights and Chulalongkorn University. I wish this event be a great success. Thank you.
Next, I would like to invite. Professor Dr. Alberto Garcia, the Director and Chair of UNESCO Biochair.
Good morning and welcome to Bangkok for this 8th International Workshop and Symposium on Bioethics, Multiculturalism and Religion. Thank you all the people participating online. We welcome you to this important event for us. And it's my pleasure and my honor to give thanks to the people and the institutions that have been working hard for more than 3 years before the pandemic to make this event possible. First of all, I want to thank Professor Surat Ongadaran, the director of the Center for Science and Technology in Society of the Chulalongkorn University, and the team that has been working with Sora for a long time to make this meeting possible. I want to thank very much also the Ministry of Education of the Thai Royal Government for the support for the Chula University to make this meeting possible. And also to thank the people from Rome, from the UNESCO chair in Bioethics and Human Rights, that has been also working hard. First of all, Father Joseph Tam as the scientific director of the meeting. He has been also working for not only for a long time, but also hard to make this event possible, as well as Serena Montefusco and Alistair Lee. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming, Sarah. Thank you very much for connecting with us. And the history of these workshops, this is the 8th. It started in 2009 in Jerusalem. Some of you were there, especially I want to thank David, as we mentioned yesterday, one of the fathers of this lively community. And then from Rome, we moved from Jerusalem, we moved to Rome in 2011, to Hong Kong, 2013, to Mexico, 2015, to Houston, Texas at MD Anderson Cancer Center in 2016, if my memory is working okay. Then we met in Rome. We met in Rome again in 2017. And the last workshop took place in Casablanca. And today we are here in Bangkok. Thank you for coming. And I would like to remind you what is the mission of this project of the Bioethics, Multiculturalism and Religion Initiative, in which we try to provide a forum in which representatives of diverse religions and cultural traditions can, on the one hand, to engage one another in sustained scholarly dialogue about global bioethics. We also want to cultivate an amicable atmosphere so participants can learn about each other's tradition or religions with discursive empathy. We want to promote mutual understanding of global bioethics through respectful discussion and scholarship, and strive to develop a linguistic and conceptual space in which common ground or convergence can emerge and be mutually recognized and appreciated. And finally, we want to foster a creative cooperation while respecting the dignity and uniqueness of each tradition. This is the spirit of what we have been doing from the very beginning, and I wish and I invite you to keep this spirit alive during these days. Thank you very much.
Next, I would like to invite my good friend and colleague, Associate Professor Dr. Surade Chodapongpan, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, to give a welcome speech on behalf of the university. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Somso, Director, Bureau of International Cooperation, Ministry of Education, Professor Dr. Alberto Cassi, Director, UNESCO Bio Chair, Professor Dr. Joseph Tan, UNESCO Bio Chair, and distinguished guests. On behalf of Chulalongkorn University, we're pleased and honored to have the opportunity to welcome you to the 8th International Bioethics, Multiculturalism, and Religion Workshop and Symposium. It has been held for the first time in Thailand. It is a distinct honor to our university to receive your trust in organizing this important event. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has created many disruptions all around the globe, and the organization of this event is no exception. Nonetheless, I would like to thank the persistent effort by all those who are involved to pull out this event successfully. Thailand is now opening itself up to visitors once again, and some of you here probably are here for the first time, but so welcome to Bangkok. And I hope you take this opportunity to enjoy what the country has to offer. The focal organization of this workshop and symposium is done by the Center of Science, Technology and Society. The center is a research center belonging to the Faculty of Arts, and it consists of members from such diverse fields as architecture, sociology, philosophy, and many more. The center originated as a center for ethics of science and technology, but around 3 years ago, a group of faculty members at Chulalongkorn decided that the work of the center should be revised and the scope should be expanded to reflect the interdisciplinary and social scientific nature of the work. And the center took on its present name, and the research division of the university has been granting seed money for the center for 3 years already. At first, the local organizers would like to hold this event on the campus of Chulalongkorn University. But after several postponements and disruption due to the pandemic, it was decided that it was more convenient to hold the event in a hotel. However, you will have the opportunity of visiting our campus tomorrow in the afternoon. Some of you probably have seen our beautiful buildings already on the website. So, please enjoy, your visit tomorrow. Tomorrow we have the other discussion on the 7th floor of the Center for Academic Resources for our main library from 1:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. The campus has been brought back to life when we decided to allow students to study on campus after 2 years of online learning. So you will experience the Chula campus as being full of vitality and students once again. Furthermore, this hotel, the Royal River Hotel, we see the blind curtain. If you look through the curtain, you will see a beautiful Chao River. So at this time of the year, the water level is at its height, but I don't think the water level will be higher than what you see here, but at least during the time of your stay here. Speaking about the height of the water, leads us to the topic of this workshop: environmental protection in religious perspectives. So there have been several environmental disasters already this year, and the scientific consensus is that this will result in global warming. It's now time for us to reflect on what roles the religious traditions of the world can play in raising the consciousness and to find lasting and reflective solution to this global problem. I sincerely wish that such an effort bear fruit for all of us, not only in Thailand or Asia, but all around the world. So lastly, we'd like to welcome all of you once again, and thanks so much for your participation. Some of you will enjoy your stay in Bangkok, and hope that you get food for thought from this conference. Thank you so much.
And lastly, I would like to invite Professor Joseph Tam, a research fellow at the UNESCO Bioethics, who will give us a speech.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the Ministry of Education and officials from the Trinidad University for inviting us to hold this 8th encounter in Bangkok, Thailand. It's a very beautiful venue, totally unexpected venue because we're living in a room that is so big in Manila. So thank you once again for your hospitality. And as we know, this has been quite challenging times for us. This 8th workshop was planned last year and has been delayed for a year. I think the topic we chose this time is very appropriate because it has to do with our relationship with the environment. And in some way, the COVID pandemic has made us realize that we are not alone in this world, in this cosmos, and there's things that can actually impact us, including the environment, and also the other living beings. You know, the virus is really not. We could be impacted by other things, and so it makes us more humble. And this is our 8th encounter, as Roberto was saying, and I think it has been quite, for me at least, very interesting and fruitful dialogue that we've been able to muster in these last 12 years. We've managed to publish 6 books from these encounters, which is a concrete evidence that this effort has been quite successful academically. And I think in addition to it being an academic event, I think it's also a demonstration that it's possible for religion to somehow encounter these complicated issues that touches on bioethics, culture, traditions, religions, interaction between science, faith, philosophy, and theology, and sociology, and whatever you would add to that. But I think it is something that we strive to do. But in addition to the academic part of it, it's also, I think, some of us have developed this kind of friendship that I think is also something that is a testimony to the fact that religions can live together, coexist together peacefully, especially in today's world. There's a lot of tension and strife and wars, polarization. People have different ideas and they're not able to talk to each other, shouting at each other. So I think we try to, maybe a little bit, in a very small way, demonstrate that dialogue is possible in a peaceful way and a very amicable way. Once again, for those who could not come, I mean, I guess we cannot avoid it, especially the speakers from Hong Kong that I see on the screen. Hopefully you could stay with us for most of the time, for at least next few days, so that we could somehow, by means of technology, engage in this conversation, even though not in person, but at least virtually as well. Thank you once more for coming, and I hope every one of you will enjoy the hospitality here in Bangkok. Thank you for inviting us. This beautiful place, beautiful city, beautiful family.
Alhamdulillah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most kind. Yes, so yesterday I arrived and I saw the biodiversity, or some of the biodiversity on the way to on the way here, and I particularly like the water lilies, which are in abundance because of the rain that has rained so much in the last few days. And I have been praying for the sun to dry up some of the floods, so so that we can actually have this conference and people can attend it properly. So I will begin. I am Luzita Ball, the trustee, or a trustee of the Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences, which is based in Birmingham, UK, but the trustees are all over the UK. And we meet regularly to discuss our various projects that we're supporting, and the educational materials that we produce are online, and we have a website, and that's the logo down the bottom there, IFES. So it's been going for around 20 years. Okay, so the first point I'd like to make is that from the point of view of the Quran, which is based on one of the primary sources for Islam, diversity is intentionally placed by God or Allah or Eloh. It's intentionally placed in nature. So even human beings are part of that diversity. So as I said, that Islam is based on the Quran, which is our holy book, revealed to Prophet Muhammad peace upon him over 25 years through angel Jibreel or Gabriel. And also another primary source is the example or sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad peace upon him and his teachings, which are recorded in the hadith. So one of the first quotes I will give you is from the Quran. Have you, Prophet, not seen how God sends water down from the sky and that we produce with it fruits of varied colors, that there are in the mountains layers of white and red of various hues and jet black, and that there are various colors among human beings, wild animals and livestock too. It is those of his servants who have knowledge, who stand in true awe of God, which is Surah 35, ayahs 27 to 28. So this is clear, one of the clear indications, and there's an illustration of those very mountains, which exists, I think, in the Himalayas. So diversity is very much important to God and part of his intention with his creation. So why are the diverse types here? That's one of the questions we may have. So one of the reasons is because they are beautiful, and we have a phrase in Islam which is Allah huwa jameel wa hubbu jamal. He is beautiful and he loves beauty. So everything is beautiful because it reflects God. Also, it's because everything that is created is a sign or a proof that God exists for whoever is willing to reflect upon it. So it's a reflection of God's wisdom, his intelligence, his beauty, and his laws. So everything is a way of learning, not just for human beings, but we also believe there are other creatures called jinn or genies in British culture or Western culture. They're called genies. They also have free will. They also have to learn how to use their free will in a good way. So all of creation is proof of God or sign of God. And one of the reactions we are supposed to have is gratefulness to God for this diversity and beauty of creation, intelligence of creation, and our reaction then is to use it in the best way. So there's another quote of Quran. about the beautiful creation. Did they never observe the sky above them, how we built it and beautified it, and it has no cracks. And we have spread out the earth and have set upon it firm mountains and have caused to bring out plants of all beauteous kinds. To Surah 50, ayahs 6 to 7. So again, we talk about the beauty and many beautiful kinds. Oops. And another example of diversity. And in the earth are neighboring tracts and gardens of vines and green crops or fields, and date palms growing into 2 or 3 from a single stem root, or otherwise 1 stem root for every palm, watered with the same water, yet some of them we make more excellent than others to eat. Truly in these are signs for people who understand. So I've given you an illustration of just some of the different types of dates. As you can see, there are red, yellow, brown, black, large, small, wrinkly, smooth, all kinds of different dates. So this is just an example of just one of the fruits which we know about. And this diversity is there in every fruit. Like mangoes, you have red, green, black, orange, yellow, all different tastes, sour, sweet. So we have a great diversity in everything. And human beings too. So we have great diversity in humanity. We created human beings into different nations and tribes so that you might get to know one another. In God's eyes, the most honored of you are the ones most mindful of him. God is all-knowing, all-aware. This is a very, very well-known verse of the Quran. Surah 49, ayah 13. So the diversity is not meant to make us hate each other or to feel superior to each other or to prefer our tribe over all other tribes. It's meant to help us to recognize each other, which I was thinking about how important it is that we know who's who, because if we don't know who's who, then we have a problem. We don't know who's committed a crime or who's not committed a crime, who has done these great works and who's not done these great works. So we need to recognize the faces of each other. So this is one of the meanings of this. And another meaning is that we are meant to get to know each other and to understand each other, and that will benefit us. So we're not meant to be fighting between our tribes, which is what we usually do. In many cases, people are fighting between the tribes. We are meant to be one family, the children of Adam. Peace be upon him. Another ayah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And among his wonders is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your tongues and colors. For in this, behold, there are messages, indeed, for all who are possessed of knowledge and insight. And that's Surah 30, ayah 22. So even our languages and our colors are all intended by God. And each language has its wisdom. And I find language very interesting, and especially the original meaning of many words. And we were having discussions about this last night, about the similarities between Hebrew and Arabic, because they're very close Semitic languages, and how similar they are. And to me, the deep meaning of Arabic words is very wise and very interesting. So, and probably the same for Hebrew, because you get real insight into the real human nature, deep human nature. I think that's what, and the nature of all creation. So, and even the diversity of our paths is mentioned in the Quran. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We have assigned a law and a path to each of you. If God has so willed, he would have made you into one community, but he wanted to test you through that which he has given you. So race to do good. You will all return to God, and he will make clear to you the matters that you differed about. That's Surah 5, ayah 48. So we can learn by understanding the different paths that we are all on, and we can see the results of our actions, and we can learn maybe one path has concentrated on a particular kind of wisdom, and another path has concentrated on another area of wisdom. So there's a hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, the wisdom is the lost property of the believer. Wherever he finds it, he has the best right to it. Okay, 5 minutes. All right. So let's get on with how we're supposed to relate to creation. So the relationship between God and, or Allah in Hebrew, and Allah in Arabic, and nature. So it is to Allah that everything in the heavens and the earth submits. Every creature that moves, and even the angels, they are free from arrogance. They fear their Lord above them, and they do as they are commanded. So all of creation is, according to Islam, they are Muslim. That means that they are submitted to the will of God, and they willingly submit. They do what God wants them to do. Unfortunately, human beings, they were given free will, so they are not quite the same, and they can choose to disobey God. And the same with the jinnis, the genies or jinns, which are another very old creation of God. So what are we? We are meant to be the successors, or the khilafah of God on earth, not of God, I mean. We are the successors on the earth, which means we inherit the earth. He has given us that role. So we are managers, if you like, and we have been given the trust of the earth. So we offered the trust, amana, to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains, but they refused to take it and were afraid of it. But humanity took it on. And indeed, humanity is wrongdoing and ignorant. So, and we did this apparently before our souls were born into our bodies. We took on this amana. This was when we were with God, before we were actually born. And one of the problems is that we have this potential for great good, but also great evil. So this is continued through the whole of our history. We have this potential to be the best of forms, the best of creatures, and the worst of creatures. And it is God who is the judge of that, of what we do. So our purpose as human beings, as managers of the planet, is to keep the balance. So actually we are not able to transgress the balance. So we've been told in the Quran, the balance or mizan has been created so that you may not transgress the balance and thus practice injustice. We may practice injustice, but we will end up creating problems for ourselves. So it does actually rebalance in the end, because it cannot be transgressed, but we can try. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a man of pure faith, stand firm and true in your devotion to religion. This is a natural disposition God instilled in mankind. There is no altering God's creation, and this is the right religion, though most people do not realize it. So this is a solution, is to be firm and true in devotion to the religion. This is what should help us to keep the balance. So what have we done to this earth? The consequences of upsetting the balance, like floods. So deforestation, I believe, is one of the causes which causes the droughts, the landslides, the floods. A lot of it comes from deforestation of mountains. So indeed, by the token of time, humanity is lost except those who believe and do good deeds and encourage one another to truth and encourage one another to patient perseverance in goodness. And corruption and mischief has appeared on land and sea as a result of people's actions, and he, God, will make them taste the consequences of their own actions so that they may turn back to God's way. So all the consequences are only a taste, a small taste of what we actually deserve for our transgression against God's limits. So I don't know whether I've got time for this really. I've got 1 minute left, but I'll just click all this. We are an honored and preferred creation, but we are accountable for everything we do. And although everything is potentially useful to us, we have limits and instructions from God, about how to keep the balance and how to stay within the pattern of nature. And we will all be accountable on the Day of Judgment. But if we do upset the pattern, there will be negative consequences in this life. And obviously, we will have negative consequences in the next if we do not abide by God's limits. And everything has inherent value because it is a reflection of God. So it's not there to be dominated or to be completely exploited by human beings. There are definitely limits, even though we have been blessed with a conscience, free will, knowledge, intellect, speech, writing, power over creation, but we still have to keep our use within limits. And these are the ayahs which that is based on. But one of the ways not to transgress the limits is not to waste. So we should not waste by excess. And we should safeguard the rights of the animals and the plants. So these are the verses which that is based on. And there's not much difference of opinion because most Muslims, mainstream Muslims, agree on the Quran and the Hadith as an authority. There may be differences in slight areas of law, but really the basis of our understanding comes from the Quran and the Sunnah. So if anyone quotes these, then people will take notice. So it shouldn't be that there is much difference of opinion about this. And so everything that we do that is beneficial towards nature, we will get a reward and a blessing for it. It is regarded as charity from us. So there's a concept of harem, which is areas that are totally protected. And there's a concept of himma, which is an area which is for limited use, which is for public use, but in a limited way, just for controlled grazing or collection of firewood, forest, honey, fruits, and herbs. So these are some areas where Islam, from over 1400 years ago, instituted protection for nature and recognized that we are all dependent upon ecosystem services. And so this shows that Islam is in total agreement with the recognition of Article 17, that all life forms are interconnected, interdependent, and that it is the God-given right of all humans and other forms of life to have appropriate access in moderation to the means to sustain themselves and their families, to access water, clean water, air, healthy and diverse natural sources of food and drink, and fertile land, and to have safe and secure and peaceful places to live. And all land that is owned should be cultivated or developed to become more beneficial, not left for speculation to increase in value. So those who can cultivate it have the best right to it. And everything should be managed with regard to the public good and minimizing harm, which is maslaha. And this should be applied to other resources such as the forest and land on hills, and the effects of our actions on hydrology and soils, and even the weather and climate change. And the general rule is justice and fulfillment of rights, including economic justice to all. And this is some of the verses of the Quran to help us to be hopeful that change is possible. So Allah does not change the condition of people until they change what is within themselves. So we have to change what is within ourselves, and that will help us to make things right. Be optimistic and you'll find the good things, said Prophet Muhammad, accept that some loss is necessary and part of this earthly life. This is not paradise, and we should turn back in humble repentance and gratefulness for God's blessings. And if we do, He will increase our blessings. And man shall have nothing but what he strives for, so we should work together for clear and common positive aims and vision. And that's enough. Yeah, I'll have to stop here. So basically our actions should be of the best and just, yeah, so there you go. That's it. Okay, sorry.
I really should say we all should appreciate, particularly this time of the Corona years, Joseph and Alberto and Soraj and Serena for organizing this conference, because this conference was organized 3 times. So we owe a triple gratitude to them, and really well done. I'll be short in my comment because much of what you'll hear about the Jewish side will be just a forward or introduction to the real thing that will come from Jonathan Crane's forthcoming presentation about the Jewish point of view. So, but I'll say quite a lot about the Jewish point of view, because unlike Joseph's description, I didn't feel when reading Lusita's paper as a foreigner in a temple of a completely strange culture, as yesterday, for example. I felt, as you'll see, quite at home. And oh, just this. Okay. So, as I say on the first slide, I felt that we are sister religions and very close, and therefore I found striking quotations which go parallel with some of the quotations you have seen in the presentation itself, and some others which Lusita didn't have time to show on screen. But I'll start with a common, since coming myself from philosophy, from the more abstract principles which I think make the 2 religious traditions very similar in their approach or attitude to nature. So the common theological principle are, let's say, 3. First, it's the unity of God, and the fact that there's only one God and there's nothing else apart from God before the creation of nature. Nature was created, the world, natural world was created. Nature is not divine. Nature is not sacred in the strict sense of the word, and therefore, since the unity of God is such a basic principle, the threat of pagan worshipping of nature or parts of nature is always to be taken seriously, and therefore nature should not be given any sacred status, no animism, as we'll see, no pantheism in both religions. The unity of God means that the world was created by that God, and God in that sense is not part of nature. It's transcendent to our world. It's much beyond anything natural. There's nothing natural in God. And that goes against pantheism, the idea that God and nature are one, you know, like philosophers know it from Spinoza as one of the best examples of pantheism. So that's why Spinoza was excommunicated. In a way, the Jewish tradition couldn't stand it. The third principle is that the personal nature or the personal character of God. God is not natural in the sense that what he does is by design, by intention, by planning. And that includes, of course, the creation itself, but also the way our natural world is constructed. And one aspect of this design is the status of humanity within nature. And nature, or the natural world, serves in rough terms for the use, or for the as something instrumental to human beings. And we'll see some expressions and the differences in interpretation of this relationship between human beings and nature. But I want to emphasize that due to these 3 principles, we should take for granted a certain distance between both God and nature on one hand, and between humanity and nature on the other hand. They are not the same. Both God and nature and humanity and nature are distant from each other. Okay. Now I chose to go by comparisons of quotations because I don't have time to present my whole comment, and I think texts in both traditions are so central that and sometimes so beautiful that it's worthwhile comparing them. So some of them we have seen on the left side of the Muslim tradition already on Lusita's screen, but I'll go by subject. So if we start by guardianship and responsibility, human beings as guardians of nature, you can see on the left-hand side, we offer the trust to heavens, you know, it's and earth to mountains, but they were refused to bear it and were apprehensive of it. Nature didn't want to take care of itself, but the human being accepted it. Now, in Genesis, we find, again, the same idea of guardianship. The Lord took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till and tend it, especially to tend it, to keep it, to guard it. So on the one hand, in the Islam, it's human beings who assume actively the responsibility. In the Jewish case, they are more passive. They are given that role of guardians, but nevertheless, the idea is the same. The earth is not the property of humanity. That's also very important for us concerned with ecological matters. It's given in trust. Incidentally, the Arabic term I learned from Lusita's paper is amana, which is exactly the same word, or even phonetically the same word as in Hebrew, which is also trust and contract, and from it comes the word you all know, amen. You know, amen comes from something which has stability, which is trustworthy, you know, so amen is the same root in Arabic and in Hebrew. Another similarity is between the harim and hima, which Lusita mentioned shortly. The land in Hebrew, the land is mine. You are but temporary resident with me. Yes, we are not the masters of this place. We are just temporary. We are born and die, and in evolutionary terms, we are also temporary here for a few 100,000 years. The species is here and it will be gone. And so we are just temporary resident. In Hebrew, in the Jewish tradition, there's the practice of Shemitah, which is a commandment not to cultivate the land every seventh year. Every seventh year, the whole year, the land is left to rest, to rejuvenate, because the land is not ours. So we cannot over-exploit it. Okay. And next, intergenerational responsibility, mentioned also by Lusita. So I won't go to read the Islamic side, but there's a very nice quotation from the Talmud. While walking along the road, a sage saw a man planting a carob tree. He asked him, "How long will it take for this tree to bear fruit?" 70 years, replied the man. The sage then asked, "Are you so healthy a man that you expect to live the length of the time and eat its fruit?" The man answered, "I found a fruitful world because my ancestors planted it for me. Likewise, I'm planting for my children." So it's the same kind, the tending, the guardianship involves not only our generation, but primarily future generations. We have to keep the world intact for future generations. This means also a very important a commandment about which we'll hear much more from Jonathan. Do not waste, bal tashchit. Yes, in the Islamic tradition, eat and drink, but waste not by excess. For Allah loves not wasters. So there's the threat of overconsumption. And in the Jewish side, this prohibition does not apply to trees alone. Rather, anyone who breaks utensils, tears garments, destroys buildings, stop up a spring or ruins food, Chris, ruins food, is with destructive intent transgresses the command, do not destroy. That's from Maimonides. So we see, again, very strict approach to against overconsumption and waste. Now, nature itself, it's not necessarily God, it's through God, but nature is doing the punishment. We don't have to wait for God's punishment, because we are going to punish, are already being punished now. So there's a beautiful story, interpretation of Noah and the flood. You know, it says when Noah came out of the ark, he opened his eyes and saw the whole world completely destroyed. He began crying for the world and said, God, how could you have done this? God replied, you, Noah, when I told you I would destroy the entire world, I lingered and delayed so that you would speak on behalf of the world. But when you knew that you would be safe in the ark, the evil of the world did not much touch you. You thought of no one but your family, and now you complain? Then Noah knew that he had sinned. So we heard a very similar quotation from Lusita in the Islamic tradition. So nature itself is punishing us. And God will not do much to save us. The Holy Blessed One took the first human and passing before the trees of the Garden of Eden said, see my works, how fine and excellent they are. All that I created for you. Reflect on this and do not corrupt, desolate my world. For if you do, there will be no one to repair it or clean the mess after you. So that's also a very nice lesson. No one is going to clean for us. Even God is not going to clean the mess we are doing of our environment now. And there's the aesthetic value. I won't expand on it because Lusita brought us a beautiful, more than one a quotation. I'll bring a parallel one here on the right-hand side. A person goes out to the fields in the garden in the month of Nisan, which is April, and sees flowering trees, sprouting branches, should recite the blessing. Blessed are you, God our Lord, King of the universe, who did not leave anything lacking in his world and created within it fine creations and beautiful and fine trees so that we would give pleasure to men. That's from Maimonides. Now that's called, we'll talk a lot about the intrinsic versus the instrumental value of nature, the more anthropocentric or less anthropocentric. We'll hear again a lot about it in detail from Jonathan, but I think that this strand also of the intrinsic nature of the value of nature is also quite prominent in the two monotheistic religions, although there are also the more anthropocentric, instrumental approaches. And I think, I'll just mention variety and diversity. I think I'll skip reading the quotations, one of which was read by Lusita, very similar one in the Hebrew Psalms. Species and individuals, I have to mention, because that has not been mentioned yet, that it's interesting that animal species are protected, should be protected. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't eat animals, individual animals, or kill or use animals as workforce. But the species the diversity of nature in terms of species should be protected. That's for animals. But for human beings, it's not the same. It's both the species and the individuals who must be fully protected, because as we know, the human life of individual lives are worth as the whole world in one of the Hebrew sayings. So just to wrap up, that's the last slide, which looks more forward. I want to emphasize that unlike the Muslim tradition, according to Zita, I learned, and we heard it today, that there's a fairly monolithic view of the relations of human beings to nature, and how it should be interpreted. In the Jewish tradition, there's never, on any issue, there's never one view, and there's always a lot of controversy. And regarding nature, that's the very first theme in which there is that controversy. There are the two stories of the creation of Adam in Genesis. The one on the left, which is Genesis 1, says that God created the human beings to conquer and master the world and use it for its own purposes. That doesn't mean that we can do whatever we like. We should maintain that balance. We should make it, because otherwise no one will clean the mess after us. So in that respect, this anthropocentric view does not mean wild over exploitation and of natural resources, but it's one view. The other view is the one I mentioned in the beginning, that God gave the nature for as to use it, but to tend it. So we have to guard it from any radical transformation. And that goes together with what's called today deep ecology and the giving of an independent value, independent of humanity, to nature. So you'll hear me defending in the following days, more from a philosophical point than a Jewish point of view, the first attitude, the more anthropocentric. And this is one of the things I think that will have some controversy between my colleague Jonathan Crane, who comes also from the Jewish tradition, but the Jewish tradition contains everything. So thank you very much.
For questions. The way, and also we will also take into account the those who are online will also ask the questions. The way we're going to go about this is, first of all, the first part will be more directed towards the two speakers, right? So are there any questions directed towards them in particular? And then after they have, clarified the positions, then we can and ask different questions. The way we were doing it before, I know this is the Baptist University, now called, is if you have a substantial question, put up 5 fingers, right? So like a longer question. If it is just a short question or to clarify something, put up 1 finger, right? Or it never works. It never works, but it's in theory. I have a question. I don't know how you do it on the internet. I think there's only 5 fingers. Anyway, so this is the idea. So right now, are there any? Yes, you can. Maybe you two could sit up there. You two could sit up there. You can put up the chairs. They can sit up there. Yeah. So, okay,
Thank you for the visit. Maybe you could explain better the difference you mentioned between Islam. The responsibility is something that comes more from the will of humans, and in the Jewish tradition is more something that you design. And so, if you see that, agrees with that.
Yeah, well, maybe you start with the quite striking quotation that you brought.
It was about the amana being offered to human beings, which we'll say, well, why? When were we offered this amana? But actually, according to Islam, all souls of the Bani Adam, the tribe of Adam, were all before God, and he asked them to bear witness to one thing, which is that he is one God, and they agreed that they bear witness to that. So it's part of human nature to believe in one God according to Islam. It's part of their natural disposition called fitra. But also, I think at that time, and this is what the hadith, no, this is actually Quran, the quote is referring to, is that at that time it must have been that God offered the amana to all of creation, different parts of creation, and all of them did not, they feared to have that responsibility to look after the universe. So the amana was given to human beings because they agreed to do it, but they did not know of their human beings did not understand that they had this very vast range of potentials to do evil and to do good. So it was seen as a foolish thing to do by human beings because they could cause a great destruction. And the angels knew that when human beings were created, but human beings still took that on as a responsibility in that state that they were in before the souls were born into human bodies. This is my understanding of what that means. Yeah.
Yes, in the Jewish quotation, as you saw from Genesis 2, human beings are created in a passive way. So the role they are given by God when they are created is imposed on them. That's what you are going to do. Yes, so it's not even a blessing. You know, this is that's what I expect of you, man, is to cultivate the earth and tend it. So it's in that sense it's passive. On the one hand, I think the first story of creation in Genesis 1 is giving human beings a more active role in the sense that I personally interpret it. I know it's controversial, that human beings are given that special role in the natural creation because they have the image of God. And the image of God has to do with the fact that only human beings are what I call evaluators. They have value, but also can give values. Nature, other entities in nature cannot give value to anything, even if they have value. So my view is that the way God wants to give value to the world is to create human beings who are like God in the sense that they can value whatever is around them. And that gives them an active responsibility over nature, because they are, in that respect, it's not only imposed on them, but the power of giving value to things makes them responsible for those things.
Okay, one finger, which was from you, okay.
Nope.
Turn it on, press the button. The button.
Can you speak louder?
Yeah.
Okay. My question for Zita, you mentioned it near the end that, paraphrasing, Muslims should all agree on this. Right, that there's differences, but this is accepted, this should be. My question is that a hopeful statement or an empirical finding? Can you speak to the diversity of Muslim opinions on environmentalism?
My understanding is that if Muslims were told, who are people who are believing Muslims, they believe in the Quran and the Sunnah. That's what it means to be a Muslim. They believe that the Quran is the word of God and revealed to human beings, and also that the Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet sent to human beings to guide them. And so that means that it was that they should take those sources as authoritative. Okay, there is a difference between Shia and Sunni in that they have slightly different hadiths. They have different collections of hadiths which Sunni Muslims don't have. So in that respect, they may have different sources and they may not recognize all the hadiths of the Sunni sources. So that's where some difference of opinion may come. But actually the majority of Muslims are Sunni all over the world. And if they have learned about Islam the Sunni way and and they know that Islam is based on the Quran and Sunnah, they would take those verses and they would take notice of them. But a lot of the difference in behavior of Muslims comes from their ignorance. So they will behave according to their knowledge. So a lot of people I've met don't know of all these quotations. So it's up to us to spread that awareness. So this is why my organization exists, because a lot of Muslims don't know. And there are a fifth of the world's population of Muslims, a lot of people to educate. So that is a big job, which is now being done increasingly over the last 2 decades. I think people have really taken that job on and tried to spread awareness in many different countries, Muslim countries.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Father Joseph, for this beautiful metaphor of visiting each other's temples. I think it really inspired all of us to think differently about this conversation. So, Lucia, when I was listening to you, a lot of it indeed sounded very familiar as David presented to us. But there was one concept that intrigued me, and that is integrating beauty into this. So when you talk about Allah being beautiful, you obviously don't mean in the physical sense, and I'm wondering, in your tradition, what theological meaning, what is the sense of beauty?
Okay, well, in Islam, there's 2 concepts. There's Hasan and Husn. Husn is inner beauty and Hasan is outer beauty. And of course, God is not a physical, he does not have physical limitations in Islam. He's all-encompassing, he is unlimited. He is not to be confined to a particular space. So you cannot see him in that sense. He's not, but he is beautiful in everything he does. So everything is, there's a husn, beauty in all his actions, in everything he has created, in all his designs. They're not just useful, they're not just useful and intelligent and wise in the way they work, but also they are beautiful. So this is, I mean, like a rose, for example, is soft, it smells beautiful, and it protects itself with its thorns. You may not think they're very good, but they're useful for the rose to protect itself. But also, it is medicinal. So it's a tonic for the whole human body. It is medicinal, particularly for the heart and for the womb. So there is so much to every part of God's creation, and I'm always amazed how many different uses each plant has. You know, how many, not every plant is medicinal, but so many plants are medicinal. So every part of creation is not only beautiful, but it's useful and beautiful.
Good. Actually, I'm going to check one finger question to David. You mentioned about the 7-year pause in the Jewish tradition. Is it being practiced, or is this more like an ideal?
No. This is still operational today. Today, in the state of Israel, it's not very easy to enforce it, but there are sectors, whole sectors, Orthodox people in Israel who do not buy vegetables which were grown just in this season. So they either get imported vegetables, or buy it from Muslims, Muslim Arabs who till their land, and that works quite well. So, and you see on the main highway from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, you see there are some fields growing corn or whatever, and one of them has a huge sign which says, "We keep Shemitah, we keep that practice." So whatever is grown here is not grown this year, this particular year, which just ended, by the way. And so I'll tell you, we have in our building, there are 8 apartments, 2 of them by religious people who prefer the gardener not planting new flowers this year, just letting them naturally grow, and only when the year ends, he can plant flowers again. So we were tolerant, so we agreed. So this is quite an active, still in operation.
Okay, there was a 5-finger. It was before Shani. There was there was someone else. Was it? There's some you, John. Okay. First.
I'd like to follow up on Margit's question about beauty. Why is it that our religious traditions actually have us learn that beauty is important? Why do we need to be told that different species, both individuals and collectives, are beautiful?
Do you mean why do Muslims need to be told that they're beautiful? I mean, most people could recognize the beauty. I think.
Right. So why do we have to be taught?
Maybe because human beings have a tendency to be a bit blind sometimes to the beauty. Some people are just blind to the beauty of the forest, for instance. They see them as a money-making opportunity. So rather than looking into why did God create the forests on the mountains? Why are they there? What is their purpose? Are they, that they're protecting the water, the soil, everything? Instead of looking at that and thinking of before they act, they quickly think, oh, I can turn it all into paper or a golf course, or I can do some mining in that area. So in a way, highlighting the beauty and the wisdom of the creation is a way of getting human beings to stop and think, maybe there's a reason why this is here, and maybe I should respect it and be careful in the way I use it.
So in other words, it's a way to, our religious tradition, or Islamic tradition in particular, is trying to press against utilitarian worldview.
I believe that it is meant to limit it, yeah.
So in other words, there's danger in thinking about a human relationship with the natural world in only utilitarian terms.
Of course, yeah, that we should realize it's not just there for us to make money out of, definitely.
Thank you.
May I add to it, following my response to Alberto's question, I think that you may read this idea as a way of God to give human beings another sense of value, because if human beings are the only evaluators in the world, that applies also to aesthetic values. So we are given a beautiful world so as we can enjoy it. But that does not mean a utilitarian view. On the contrary, as you yourself mentioned, God gives us the pleasure of beauty. He doesn't need it. The rest of nature doesn't need it. Flowers cannot appreciate their own beauty, but we can. On the other hand, this is a kind of evaluation which is non-utilitarian. So that enriches the evaluation of human beings, of the world, gives them what we call in philosophical terms intrinsic value. But it's anthropocentric, that's it. Sorry.
The next one is Fasil.
Thank you. My question, I'll frame it in terms of Genesis, but then we can also do the parallel with the Islamic tradition. What caught my attention is you have both spoken about the order of creation. So Genesis 1 and 2. What value or what teaching does Genesis 3 on original sin, what we in the Christian tradition call original sin, have on this entire discussion? Because at least the Christian interpretation of that text is that because of man's sin, creation itself is fallen, is disordered. Genesis 3:17, cursed is the land. And therefore, when we talk about anthropocentrism, etc., we can't just limit it to the order of creation, but also for us to the order of redemption. In other words, man's role is not just based on the original order of creation and caring for creation and guardianship and stewardship, but there's also the whole question of that nature itself needs to be redeemed because of the fall of man. But now man has a role, a necessary role to play in that redemption of nature itself. So I just want to open up the question about how both of, well, the Islamic tradition and the Jewish tradition view original sin and the effect of original sin on creation, and then how this influences the vision of man on creation.
Okay. I think the original sin is a concept exclusive to Christianity. So according to Islam, we have the same story of Adam and Eve, or she is named Hawa in Arabic. And they do succumb to temptation. They eat of the forbidden tree that God has told them they should not go near, because the shaitan or the devil has told them it will give them immortality. But instead of them being forever carrying the original sin, in the Islamic understanding, according to the Quran, they both Adam and Hawa, they asked God for forgiveness, and they were forgiven by God. But they were given a place on earth as a test for their free will. And this is not seen too much as a punishment from God. Then they did not carry that original sin. So in Islam, nature is not cursed, and it does not carry a sin. It is there as a test for human beings to use according to God's commands. And if they do it right, they will have a good result. And if they do it wrong, they will have negative consequences. And so nature can be repaired if we repent from what we've done wrong and we try to make amends. There is always a way. If we're optimistic and you try and work hard, then we can actually repair our damage that we have made. Yeah.
Samira, nature is created perfect and it doesn't need any repair. It would need repair once we intervene in it, but nature does not need any redemption, and doesn't need human beings to redeem it. So the flaw in the act of creation, of divine creation, has to do solely with human beings. And that was God's misconception in the beginning, because he thought that giving human beings consciousness, the image of God, and the power to choose, volition, would be the crown of creation. But God didn't realize that human beings are going to abuse it. And then comes the fall, what you call original sin, and later on the corruption which leads to the deluge, to the flood. And then after the flood, God at last realizes that he can have it only one way, either create human beings or not create. If you want to create nature without human beings, would the world be perfect? If you want to create human beings so as to spread God's image in the world, then you take the risk that from time to time human beings are flawed necessarily, and they will fall, and they will need redemption and mercy and pardon, etc. But once God realizes it, he promises never to punish the world in the sense of the flood, to destroy the whole of humanity, and be reconciled with the idea that creation is finite and as such is flawed.
Okay, sorry, can I just follow up on that? Okay. So, no, thank you, David, because no, I agree with everything you say. And maybe here is a difference, certainly that I didn't know how Islam interprets what we call original sin before. So that's certainly something new. And I want to clarify your comments about Judaism, because maybe there's a difference here as well. At least in the Christian tradition, certainly creation is perfect at the beginning. Then because of man's misuse of freedom, there is the fall, original sin. As a result of that, according to our tradition, there is also a consequence not only for man, but for creation itself, for nature itself.
Why?
Which enters into disorder. I mean, we can talk about the why, but the only question I have at the moment is, in the Judaic tradition, there isn't this sort of disorder in creation.
Right. I think the animals are not to blame from Adam and Eve's actions, from the human sin. Why should they blame for it?
Blame no, but suffer.
Well,
I'm just trying to clarify. And
okay, I don't know. Maybe Jonathan, can you? Am I right? I don't. You're more of an expert on that.
I agree with David's interpretation that reading into 3:17, Genesis chapter 3 verses 17, as a collective punishment for all of nature, for humankind's actions, that it somehow stains the rest of nature. That's a later interpolation into the biblical text. It's not what the text actually says. It talks about how human beings, that they will need to somehow work laboriously to extract their nourishment rather than the land itself or nature at large. So we can have a conversation offline about the differences between Judaic interpretations of that Edenic story and the Catholic traditions as well.
There's actually a question from also online, so you get that. Yes.
Thank you. It's good to see everybody virtually. I apologize I'm not able to join you all in our 10 years of fellowship. But I wanted to ask a follow-up question, and I know I'm speaking tomorrow, but then there's I think the language that we're using is a little bit interesting. So Dr. Ball used the word repair, right? The idea that we can repair nature because of the harms that man perhaps has perpetrated upon it. So I want to pick up on that term with the question, right? And following up this idea of redemption. This is the term that I think Dr. Samir was just bringing up, right? Redemption, or someone said redemption, this idea of original sin. That is there a need for nature to be repaired or redeemed, period? Meaning, isn't it what it is, right? Isn't the state of nature always natural? And it is always using the great idea from David, right? Instrumental versus intrinsic. So it is always of an instrumental value or attribution or labeling from whatever authority looks at it. But it is always in its original state, meaning it is never disturbed at all, but always as is meant to be by God, no matter what humankind has or has not done to it, right? That it is a tapestry for reading off signs at different moments, but those signs were always embedded and always intended for God to see. And I'm posing this question provocatively because the terms that we're using suggest there's a state that has been disturbed or changed, right? The Christian notion here that Dr. Samir, Father Samir just mentioned, right, that we have to return it to the state because it's stained is a good term, or reflected of sins for mankind. But both of you, David and Lazita, I'm asking you provocatively, is that really the notion, right? That nature is just not nature at all times, intended as God has at all times, whether it is a sign for us to think about what we're doing or not, it is undisturbed and unperturbed by meaning, right? It's not intended to be changed to something else. It is always reflecting what God wants it to reflect for us to take, what's the word? Ibra in Arabic, but to take heed of.
Okay. In the sense of changing its genetic pattern, I think definitely nature does not need repairing. According to Islam, you should not change the pattern, which I understand to mean that we cannot improve on it in that sense, genetically. We shouldn't be messing around. I think that is dangerous, at least. You have to be very careful with what you're doing. Possibly it can be done, but you have to be very careful about it. I think that is a bit arrogant to think we can improve on nature. But one of the problems that we have caused is loss of biodiversity and destruction of ecosystems. And there is a point where we have to help ecosystems to regenerate. They cannot do it by themselves. Although the mechanisms are there, that we can learn from maybe other parts of the world or from the original state of the ecosystem, but we actually do need to help regenerate ecosystems at this point, because we have done such a lot of damage to ecosystems. And now it is being done on a landscape level in UK and other places. They're actually realizing you have to not only conserve certain areas, but you need to join them up. You need to have green corridors. You need to allow wildlife to travel from one place to another. You need to preserve different microclimates, different habitats. So it's not enough to just leave nature to repair itself. We have to actually help. And this is why we need to learn about it and understand it, respect it, and use those principles to regenerate ecosystems. That's my understanding.
Okay, there's a lot of questions. You have anything to say about this?
No, I said what I had regarding that particular issue.
Still wants to further the question.
All right, okay, so we'll leave that. I'll pick that thread up tomorrow. So here's my question now on a different topic. Is diversity by itself instrumental or intrinsic benefit? So this conversation today, this theme, one of the themes is biodiversity. And in the medical ethics realm, we always talk about diversity today, right? Diversity and inclusion as a good in and of itself. So my question to both of you is diversity, I define that first, but is diversity an intrinsic or value, of intrinsic value, or is it an instrumental one towards a different end?
Just hold on, this is a new question. So there is a follow-up from Vadit first to the repair and redemption question, and then we go to the another question after that.
I have a related question.
Yeah. Well, first to repair redemption, right?
So on the issue of repair, David, I wanted to challenge your. Sorry that one Jew challenges another, but it is a part of our tradition. On your notion of the world's nature is perfect. Obviously, I want to throw into the mix the concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world, and the long-standing Jewish view that the world was created imperfect, and then human beings were put there to repair it. And one obvious example shared across Judaism and Islam is the fact that the male body is born uncircumcised and circumcision makes it perfect. So I think the relationship of humans to the given environment in Judaism is definitely not that this is perfect. We're here to make it perfect. So I'd love to hear both of your views on tikkun olam, the duty to repair the world.
Well, I must admit that I don't know exactly, again, what the mainstream interpretation of tikkun olam is. But my view of tikkun olam is that it has to do with human beings, with human society, with our human standards, with politics, with everything human. We don't have tikkun olam is not to make the river flow in better way, or to make the mountain more beautiful than it naturally is, unless it's we who corrupted it. It's we. If we destroyed some parts of nature, then that's tikkun olam. To clean the river from all our pollution, that may be tikkun olam. But that agrees with my reading of tikkun olam as human-centered. I think tikkun olam cannot mean making better the world as it was created by God. That would be presumptuous, I think. Almost heresy.
From the Islamic point of view, always, I think it's a constant process of purification of humanity, of our intentions, our words, our attitudes, our deeds. Everything, according to Islam, is meant to be inside a human being, is meant to be constantly purified. And adopting Islam as your religion is a kind of process of slowly submitting more to God's will. And it is a never-ending process, because we are always in need of improvement. So human beings should work on themselves and on their societies and their communities, and improving and uplifting justice, trying to put into practice justice in every aspect of life, towards animals, towards humans, towards plants, the forests. So it is because of human nature always disturbing the order and corrupting itself constantly, and because of the suggestions of Shaitan, we are always fighting a battle. We're always fighting between good and evil in ourselves and in our society. So it is a never-ending process of improvement and purification. That's my understanding of. I don't have a name of what do you call it?
Tikkun Olam,
Tikkun Olam. We don't have that name, but
repair of the world, literally speaking.
But we have this concept of fitra, which is our natural disposition, and we should preserve it in our children as much as we can. The natural purity of children. We don't have the concept that they are sinful, but we have a concept that they are pure and that they have a tendency towards goodness, justice, truth, and we should preserve that. And we should be constantly trying to preserve that in our souls. And if we have any flaws in our character, we should be trying to purify them. That's the Islamic understanding of tarbiyah, which is cultivation. Yeah.
Now for Asim's
Asim.
question about
Diversity.
I think we should go over because this question came after.
Okay.
I'm talking about the same question on repair and redemption. So we have 15 minutes left. So I have a question from Chris, Alberto, and John. So maybe you can ask all 3 questions at the same time, and then we will see how.
Then I have to write.
Thank you both. My question had to do with, I had a fiber. My question had to do with cultivation. So
with what? With what? Sorry.
Cultivation.
Cultivation.
How we define cultivation, how we conceptualize cultivation, and the role of fallibility in our understandings of cultivation, both from the Islamic and Judaic perspectives. If you could speak more to that, and I'll frame it now into this conversation. We hear about regeneration, and to what extent traditionally maybe we conceptualize cultivation non-regeneratively, right? And speaking about the fall and all of these sort of ideas of repair, tradition. When we look at Genesis, we see that part of the punishment for disobeying the divine is having to farm, right? And when we look at environmental history, we see that humans, right, have been engaging in massively destructive agriculture, not only in the 20th century, but in the ancient world as well. We turned the Middle East into a desert, right? We rerouted water and destroyed entire areas. The fertile lands of the Middle East have become desert because of mismanaged farming. And the beauty of looking at the environmental history through the lens of our fallibility, how my tradition, the Greek Orthodox tradition, tends to look at the fall, means that, well, to what extent maybe have we misconceptualized cultivation, right? And how does, especially since it's the Islamic panel, Islam understand the idea of cultivation, our own imperfection, and how we can go forward from there, especially since now you mentioned regeneration. So what role do we now have to play in, I'll end it there. If you could speak to those sorts of issues more, because I think they're very important, right? Yeah.
Okay, Alberto, you have something along the same line, or is it a different question? Anyone has, is your question the same line? No. Different, yeah, okay.
So imagine that you are in an international forum of the United Nations talking about your religious perspective on the care of the environment, taking some of the sustainable development goals where environmental ethics, politics is important. How can you explain and inspire people in these kind of forums using reason and not only the sacred books and the religious vision? How you can bridge between what you believe and what you think, who you think, and through reasoning to share in a diverse forum. I like very much your introduction of the paper about the beauty of diversity, but this should be also effective, having the capacity to get into a dialogue using not only sacred sources, but the reason, in case reason is in harmony with your religious perspectives. Okay, John?
Okay. Yeah, okay. So my question is, kind of resonates with Alberto's question, which has to do with sources of authority. So both of you introduced your topics and described norms, if you will, which were contradictory at some level. So Lucita said, God says, we cannot transgress the balance of nature. And then promptly went on to describe that, in fact, we are transgressing the balance of nature, in fact. And then, David mentions or had a slide, for instance, on the difference between conquering nature, pointing out that in the Jewish tradition, there are two primary texts. One says we're conquering nature, one says we're the guardian of nature. Now, I also know that in both traditions, there is a long, in fact, authority is maintained by an active, extremely active, the activity of reason in the ulama and in the rabbinical scholars and other parts of the scholarly tradition or the scholarly religious tradition. In the Jewish faith, they're very similar. And these, the over 1,000 or multiple centuries for sure, the authority of Islam resided in that reasoning, right? It's not simply in the Quran and the Hadith, but in the reasoning of the different schools of law and the different prominent scholars that enunciated and analyzed at a higher, more profound level, for instance, that then influenced further juristic thinking about these things. And so it seems to me both of these legalistic traditions, because both traditions are extremely legalistic. There's God makes law, and whatever the law is, that's the end of the story. But obviously, it's not the end of the story, because in both traditions are immense contradictions. And so I just want to throw that out there as kind of to test the kind of positive assertions that yes, we have a duty to do this, or we have a duty to do that, or it's in man's nature to do this, or that nature is of a certain quality or has certain intrinsic characteristics. That there's a lot of diversity in each tradition about that. And I would assume because we see in both traditions today, in fact, we see different interpretations and we see different activities of religious people or people who say, yes, I follow the tradition or the laws of the tradition, and then they go and do different things. Some which are harmful to the environment, some which don't pay any attention to the environment and are sort of neutral or, they're not, and some which are quite, are helpful. So you have the instrumental view, a kind of indifferent thing. So both of those have authority in the traditions. And so it seems to me that, that needs to be a kind of, I'm going to import an idea from can you make it quick because we're running out of time. Which is that when you study the philosophy of law, there's a notion of hierarchy of laws. How do you determine the hierarchy of laws when you have, for instance, as Jonathan said, well, there's the conqueror and there's the guardian. And so you have to sort out, it seems to me, some very complicated legal problems and your tradition, of course, the legal traditions in each of the things.
Okay, so these are the three questions. You can answer them in any way you want, or not answer them. So these are the three questions, and we have another 10 minutes. Actually, 7 minutes. Okay.
As you've got your stuff written down, I've got to keep in my head. I will answer first.
Learn a lesson.
Yes, it's useful to write things down. Of course, human beings are told not to transgress, and of course they do transgress. But I think the point is in the Quran that there is a balance, and if we do transgress, there will be consequences, and we will know that we've done something wrong, and we will have the possibility of turning back to God and putting things right to some extent, repenting. And if we carried on transgressing, we would end up causing problems for ourselves and destruction of our own communities. By destroying ecosystems, we are destroying the ecosystem services that we totally depend on. We cannot live without clean water, without good soil, without rivers that flow. We cannot live without those things, without plants, without all the diversity of the ecosystems to help us medicinally, food-wise, and also in keeping the whole ecosystem going. We need all the parts, most of the parts of the ecosystem are integral to the whole function of the ecosystem. So diversity, to answer your question, I think, is very much by reason, by science, understood to be necessary, that we need this diversity to help the ecosystems to function. And now very much in all over the world, it's recognized that we need regenerative agriculture, not just sustainable, but regenerative. So we actually, if we are to minimize the harm, which is a very strong Islamic principle, minimize harm, maximize benefit from our agriculture, then we need to learn about how to work with ecosystems and not fighting them constantly, not killing off as many as we can of this particular insect or whatever. We try to manage the ecosystem in a way that we get what we need, but also nature gets what it needs. And I have trained myself in permaculture, and I'm very interested in deepening my knowledge of ecosystems so that I could teach and practice permaculture in a better way, which is basically learning from ecosystems, imitating ecosystems in the way of designing and implementing the way we grow what we need, including materials for building, medicines, food, whatever else we get from plants and animals. So integrating it in a way which is most beneficial and very intelligent, and learning from ecosystems. I think that's the way forward, and that would be wholly encouraged by Islam and probably Judaism as well. I don't know, but
actually, I also include the question of awesome if there's time about whether diversity is intrinsic in what ways.
Whether diversity is intrinsically valued.
Yes, from the scriptures.
From the scriptures, yeah. As I said, I've given you many sources from Islam to show that it's intentional. It's an intentional part of creation of God, but diversity is intended in everything, according to the Quran. And so as human beings, we should respect and value and try to understand why God intended that diversity and the wisdom that. So Islamically, we try to understand nature and try to see the wisdom of God in nature, and then learn from it and apply it in the way that we do things. So that would be the best way forward, I think.
Well, I'll start with Alberto and then Chris and John. Alberto, I cherry-picked some of the quotations and stories I brought, and intentionally I brought the one that God shows how beautiful how beautiful the world he prepared for them, and then says, I'm not going to be the guardian, you are going to be the guardian. And if you make a mess of it, that's your problem. You'll be punished by the mess, not by me. I'm not going to save you. So I think that's a message which can go from at least this part of Jewish tradition to universally. It could work well without having any attachment to a particular authority or a religious authority or cultural religion. We are responsible for what we have. We were given a gift, And now we have to make the best out of it. So I think if you're looking for a rhetorical way to convey this message, that's one of the ways, or this is one of the quotations you can bring. Now, Chris, I think your question of what cultivation means is very serious. We'll see it connects with John in a way, because of course, the original meaning of cultivation of the land is just one that was suitable for the original context, social context and technological context. But cultivation is like culture in general, includes technology and everything we do with nature, any intervention. So we have to be serious in the way we cultivate in all these respects the natural environment, and be careful to cultivate on the one hand, which means develop. It's a very progressive idea. Cultivation is making nature more of a culture, more civilized, as Kant said. You know, we have to make the natural world more civilized, more rational, but keeping that balance in which we don't destroy it. So, and that takes us, that calls for reason. And here I pass to Chris's question about, which is a deep philosophical question about authority. I think ultimately this reason is the ultimate authority in Judaism. And because you are right that it's a legalistic tradition, but just because it is so legalistic, it's a constant enterprise of interpretation. And the interpretation of the ancient sources is always guided by reason. It never appeals directly to God. There's no revelation, no authorial, no direct divine authority in any given controversy. You appeal to ancient texts. Everything has the general authority of God, of Torah, but when dealing with any particular, in our case, environmental action, you have to use your reason to make the best out of that tradition. So that's why, like cultivation, you know, the way we approach or deal with the environment constantly changes with technological advances and with natural processes, and recalls for updated discussions of the same old questions in the light of reason, of making the best out of it.
Great, I think to tie this up.
Okay, now I've got sound for everyone on Zoom as well. Perfect. Thank you very much. So the outline of this talk, I'm going to start off by just explaining what the problem is. Then I'm going to give my research question and thesis, some initial obstacles to consider, the principle of environmental beneficence and the argument that goes with it, and then some objections and responses. And before I get to the very, some of the more detail of the problem, I'm going to just give a really quick overview of how in the world I got to talking about this to begin with. And about 5 years ago, I was tasked by my work, I work at a medical school, the General Medical Council, which licenses physicians in the UK, decided all doctors should be trained in better understanding and incorporating into practice being more environmentally sustainable in their clinical practice and decision-making. And so I thought, okay, this is great, this is interesting, I'm gonna go do it. And I go and look for materials online, as you do, and found that there was basically almost nothing, especially from an ethical point of view, to teach these students. And so I thought, okay, I'll go and I'll see if I can look at the data, look at all the facts that are available. Interestingly enough, no one had really been collecting any of it. No one had really done much of anything. And I was stuck with, what do I teach these students? So it started off with explaining to the students the state of affairs, the fact that we really weren't in a very good place and they were going to have to do a lot of work as part of their careers to help improve medicine. And so what this paper tries to do is come up with something very simple and practical that clinicians could do in their everyday practice to incorporate environmental sustainability into their medical decision making. So it's just a starting point for me. That's where this comes from. So just a sense of the problem. And I'm going to be a bit hard on medicine. I apologize. I love medicine, but I need to be critical here. So it is not an exaggeration to say that healthcare is certainly one of the most, probably within the top 5 industries of the world. I think it's probably worse once we actually get good figures. Most environmentally destructive industries on earth. Just think about that for a second. Medicine, healthcare, top 5 in the world. And this ranges from contributing excessive gaseous waste from anesthetic gases, carbon into the atmosphere, plastic waste. You don't have to use your imagination. My first slide, which was a stream near my house, a bird, which is the black bird in the back there, built its house, its nest out of masks that had been made their way into the river. So it's just all around us. You don't need to use your imagination to just appreciate the amount of medical waste. And of course, it goes to the landfills, rivers, all over the place, especially depending on what country it's in. So the fact that medicine is destroying our environment and not operating sustainably is a major problem for all of us. And it's a problem because medicine as an industry is tasked with the role of sustaining and improving people's health. So it's a problem that medicine is an industry that is contributing to the deterioration of our health and contributing to the causes of illnesses that it is tasked with treating. It doesn't make any sense in that sense. So is it therefore not hypocritical and counterproductive for medicine to operate in this way? And what are we to make of this situation? So the research question is, should concerns associated with environmental sustainability be given greater priority in medical decision-making? Given the fact that I doubt many of you have sat down with your doctors recently and talked about your treatment options, and the doctor started with, now, these are the environmentally friendly ones, and these are the environmentally unfriendly ones. I mean, I'd be surprised if many of you have had a conversation like that. So I think even just doing a little bit would go a long way in terms of integrating it as a priority in medical decision-making. So I think yes, and I've come up with this principle of environmental beneficence that could ethically facilitate greater priority being given to environmental sustainability in medical decision-making. Again, I did this with the thought that at least this is something I could give my medical students as a point of conversation for them to start with patients. Now, there's a ton of obstacles. Traditionally, the ethics of medical decision-making has, of course, focused on the immediate interests of the patient, those somehow related to the patient potentially and the broader community, and of course, the physicians. And that's a problem because very rarely does the environment come into that relationship as we've seen it. And of course, the other problem is that, as I found very quickly when trying to teach, there was incredibly poor data available for decision-making. It was either inconsistent, non-existent, sloppy, unprofessional data collection when it did exist. Someone had just been like, yeah, I saw this many things in this pile of rubbish here, there, not consecutive data, very, very difficult to provide evidence-based approach. Mostly rough estimates when data was available, rarely consecutive data sets. Many peer-reviewed publications were actually based on this false, unreliable, or misrepresented data, even in top medical journals, because I was saying, whoa, suddenly someone published some data, where did they get it? Then I traced it back, it was right back to these incomplete estimates before. Unfortunately, peer review doesn't seem to be catching this. I won't name the journals, but you know them. Medicine doesn't know the scale of its own problems, which I think is a really big problem. And nowhere near enough is remotely being done to fix this. And I think there's certainly quite a lot of denial going on as well. There's also a lack of expertise. Some doctors are trained in science or ecology, but they're not necessarily trained in science or ecology. So they're not normally trained in the skills needed to provide technical advice and policy change to environmental sustainability angles of medicine. but they're obviously, I'm not saying they're not an important part of the solution. They need to be integrated in. And I think there's a further problem in my experience where I've seen a reluctance amongst healthcare professionals to defer to experts with the scientific knowledge. So it's kind of like, I'll try to figure it out myself, but there needs to be that deferral in my view. There's also sometimes a lack of motivation within the workforce. Everyone can imagine doctors are completely overworked. With COVID, it's even worse, coming to them being and saying, you know, hey, would you mind, amidst everything else you're doing, take into consideration some weighting of the environment in your medical decision-making? It might not be welcome. There might also be, and I think there is, a stubborn sense of medical exceptionism. So this idea that, hey, we're doctors, this is medicine, we're too important to get caught up in worrying about sustainability when the most important thing is saving lives and improving quality of lives. And one of the things we've often seen is people just saying, can't we just make a donation to a tree planting charity instead? Or when I've had doctors in a room, they're like, hey, I'm getting a Tesla soon, give me a break. Very difficult to change the actual clinical practice. So here's an ethical approach that I've attempted to devise. I'm interested in understanding how sustainability benefits, so things like reducing carbon emissions, less plastic, can be maximized in our medical decision-making, at least as an aspiration. And of course, this also has to be balanced with providing quality healthcare and satisfying the immediate needs of patients. So how do we try to get the most out of both these things? And of course, they're inextricably bound with other things that are in tension with one another. So we have to have, you know, the impact of right now versus the impact later. There's other concerns like time and money. So all this needs to be weighed up. So this is where the principle of environmental beneficence comes in. Decisions, it goes something like this. Decisions should be made in a way that maximizes the benefit to the environment while also, the key word here, sufficiently meeting the health needs of patients or patient populations. And of course, we can appreciate this on a few different levels. Medical decision-making happens on several levels that affect sustainability. So doctor-patient, organizational, institutional, so maybe individual clinics, and then of course is an industry level. And then for the sake of discussion here, I'm going to focus on doctor-patient just because I can't go through the minutiae of all of them. So my principle is also based on some assumptions, so that every medical decision is always going to be slightly different between the context. So we have got to take that into account. It's going to be negotiated between a doctor and a patient. It's going to be different in each instance. So for example, one treatment plan agreed between a doctor and a patient may weigh up the benefit of online consultations versus them driving in. Another one may weigh up a treatment plan that considers the use of, you know, anesthetic gases on the environment and not using them. So we need some kind of principle that can deal with all these different instances, right? So how should we apply this principle across all of these different cases? So I propose that the patient and doctor begin, so if I was teaching my medical students, I propose that you begin to outline what would deliver an ethically and medically minimally sufficient process and outcome that would satisfy both the doctor's and the patient's needs. So what out of this interaction at minimum would sufficiently address your needs? So for example, you know, make your life of a sufficient quality, address your concerns as a physician. What would it take to minimally get there? And of course, every patient will have different needs. The constant in this decision is to address them sufficiently. And of course, what constitutes sufficient? As I said, I'm talking about a level of needs that the patient and doctor can't do without and would otherwise feel like the quality of their life or professional standards had slipped below a level they could live a good life with. And this has echoes of Singer's famine, affluence, and morality too, I think, intentionally. Again, this is going to be different for each person. And once a sufficient sense, or rather a sense of sufficient needs is established between the doctor and the patient, they should then consider what is the best way to meet these needs sustainably, with other constraints being present. So you'll have to take into account cost, time, staff. And then B, what are the sustainability benefits of only meeting sufficient needs? And then making decisions from that point that expand treatment beyond the patient's needs, so long as it does not come at the cost of environmental sustainability. So you kind of establish a floor, and then you figure out how you can level up there while taking these other interests into account. Now, there's of course some objections to this view. So it's quite simple, right? I tried to make it incredibly simple so that it could fit into clinical decision-making. People might say, what does it matter if medical decision-making goes beyond treating people sufficiently, if the cost of the environment is only small? And I think the point is that environmental destruction often happens in aggregate, and so small differences make a big difference in total, and that's really how medicine will likely change. People would say, hey, you don't really have time for this. We can't have time to add this in. Well, of course, it may seem like an inconvenience now, but as ethical culture shifts, hopefully this can be included into medical decision, just like greater emphasis on informed consent has been included. And then who's going to enforce this? Well, it's hard to enforce. I acknowledge that. And what I'm hoping is that the UK is setting, and other countries will likely set sustainability goals in practice, and this will go towards that. So that will kind of be a soft or hard, depending on the country, governance. So just to round out, this is going to be a really slow process, I think, to deal with a complex problem, but nevertheless, it is essential that action is taken, because right now, effectively no action is being taken. It needs to be taken in the classroom, so that's what this is the product of, to educate medical students, the next generation of clinicians. It also needs to happen in the clinic so the clinicians can think beyond some of people I've spoken to just getting a Tesla, and even beyond that with policymakers. And I think a principle of environmental beneficence, or maybe we revise it slightly in light of the criticism, is one straightforward ethical principle that could help healthcare give greater priority to environmental sustainability in medical decision-making. Thank you.
For those who are new to us, we were doing this interreligious dialogue for many years, and she couldn't hear us. Decided to include a secular perspective. So this is something new that we added, because we thought, even though it's not a religious tradition, it is an important tradition or perspective to include in the conversation. And so I think this is it's been very fruitful and also very positive. Okay, can you hear us now, Roland?
Yep.
Okay, now, do you have a presentation, or is it just?
I have no slides,
okay.
So I'll just speak. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Father Tam. And I would like to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me to participate in this workshop. I would like to also thank Dr. John Appleby for his paper on environmental beneficence. I've entitled my response, Environmentally Sustainable Healthcare, Reflections by a Christian Realist. And I would like at the very outset to note that although Appleby writes from a secular perspective, it is difficult for people with religious commitments such as myself to disagree with his fundamental thesis and the principle of environmental beneficence he proposes. I've organized my response in 3 sections. The first section I've entitled Negotiating Stewardship Responsibilities. And I begin this section by inquiring about the philosophical and metaphysical assumptions behind John's secular, medical, and environmental ethics, especially the principle of environmental beneficence. These assumptions are not made clear in the paper, and yet there can be no ethics, no understanding of our moral responsibilities towards one another and the natural environment without some sense, however vague, of the nature and meaning of the world, of human beings, and the proper relationship between human beings and their natural habitat. How should the practice of medicine and the envisioning of medicine's goals be understood from a secular standpoint? Can secularism on its own supply the moral principles for medical and environmental ethics? Why is it so important for medicine to be practiced in an environmentally sustainable way? Does secularism accord special significance to the natural environment such that its protection and flourishing becomes a moral imperative? Does John adopt a biocentric or ecocentric framework for his medical and environmental ethics? Or is he a utilitarian? The answers to these questions cannot be found in the paper. I then delineate very briefly the theological foundations for a Christian medical and environmental ethics, namely the doctrine of creation, the uniqueness and dignity of the human being, and the theologically robust concept of stewardship. The first pages of the Bible declares that the world was brought into being by a loving creator. After he had created the world, God, Genesis tells us, declares that what he has brought into being out of nothing, ex nihilo, to be good and very good. Thomas Aquinas clarifies that the goodness of God's creation is premised on its very existence and not on the basis of its utility or usefulness. The same text in Genesis informs us that God created human beings in his own image and likeness, creatures that are at once the same with the rest of God's creation, and yet also distinct and enjoying a unique dignity. God commissioned these bearers of the divine image to be his stewards. I pointed out that although the concept of stewardship has become rather common in secular accounts of responsible action in society, the Christian concept is much more robust than these secular versions. And this is because Christian stewardship understands the responsibilities of human beings towards the world in a particular way. As bearers of the divine image, humans are to fulfill their responsibilities in a way that mirrors how God himself cares for the world. I've entitled this section, Negotiating Stewardship Responsibilities. And this is because trade-offs and compromises must be made in the faithful exercise of our stewardship responsibilities in this fallen world. The coronavirus pandemic has brought this out starkly. So for example, while vaccination has no doubt been an effective way of controlling the spread of COVID-19, its necessary rollout has resulted in severe and adverse impact on the environment, especially with regard to the proliferation of biomedical and plastic waste. So trade-offs are unavoidable. But how should these trade-offs themselves be negotiated? Should they be made in favor of human healing, or should the natural environment be given first consideration? Granted that in reality, the choice between the two options is often not quite so stark, and the relationship between human health and the environment is much more complex. Yet the question of priorities and trade-offs is not an idle one. I shall return to this question in my third section. In the second section of my response, I turn my attention to John's suggestion of how the benefits of sustainability can be maximized in medical decision-making at the doctor-patient level. John argues that this decision-making process must include a careful calibration of what is environmentally sustainable against the sufficient needs of both doctor and patient. He believes that introducing this basic framework into medical decision-making at the doctor-patient level could make a substantial impact in the way sustainability is factored into the delivery of healthcare. I think John must be commended for highlighting the importance of doctor-patient relationship, especially with regard to decisions concerning sustainable treatment strategies governed by the principle of environmental beneficence. Sustainable medicine must be practiced at all levels, and this must surely include the decisions that doctors make with their patients regarding treatment options whenever that's possible. However, I think there are several limitations and obstacles to the kind of doctor-patient collaboration that John has in mind. one of the most significant impediments to this process is the lack of knowledge. Patients who have little or no knowledge of the drugs that are used for their treatment cannot possibly be expected to make an assessment of the impact that the manufacture, the use, and the disposal of those drugs might have on the environment. But this lacuna of knowledge is not limited to patients with no medical training. They are also endemic among doctors and healthcare professionals who may be unaware of the environmental impact of medical procedures and pharmaceuticals. This has led the WHO to state in its 2017 report that lack of knowledge or awareness among those working in healthcare systems is the most commonly described barrier to sustainable practices in health systems. The second issue has to do with the practicality of the approach that John is proposing. More specifically, it has to do with whether doctors have the time to consider environmentally sustainable practices and treatments when time is already such a scarce commodity in healthcare. I suggest that perhaps a more realistic and constructive way of ensuring environmentally sustainable practices in healthcare is to integrate planetary health into clinical practice guidelines. These guidelines could be designed in such a way that provides information and recommendation regarding environmentally sustainable therapeutic strategies based on research that is done by an interdisciplinary team. And these guidelines will in no way stifle the professional autonomy or clinical independence of doctors. The final section of my paper, I return to John's principle of environmental beneficence. John explains that the principle states that when medical decisions are being made, priority should be given to whatever options would bring about the most environmentally sustainable outcome, while also preserving the needs of an important life projects of patients. I would like to tweak that a little bit to make some modest but not insignificant modifications. So I would like to restate the principle as follows. The practice of medicine and delivery of healthcare should have as their goal the health, healing, and well-being of patients, preservation of their needs and important life projects, while minimizing the negative impacts on the environment and leveraging every opportunity to work towards its flourishing for the benefit of current and future generations. My restatement of the principle of environmental beneficence unapologetically puts the accent on health, healing, and well-being of human beings. That means that when stewardship responsibilities toward the health of human beings come into conflict with the health of the environment, the former should be given priority over the latter. I recognize that this view is highly unpopular in our day, but I believe that this is because contemporary scholars have misunderstood the Christian concept of the relationship between humans and the environment. As Pope Francis has perceptively pointed out in his encyclical Laudato Si, the excessive and misguided anthropocentrism that we find today cannot be associated with Christian anthropology. In fact, it is its distortion. Equally perceptive is the point made by the pontiff that the solution to this distorted anthropocentrism is not biocentrism, for that would only bring about another imbalance. The solution is to return to the biblical understanding of the proper relationship between human beings and the natural environment. It is to recapture the biblical vision of the role that human beings should play in relation to the rest of creation that is not inspired by the Promethean vision of mastery of the world, but that is understood more properly in the sense of responsible stewardship. Finally, the ethics of environmentally sustainable medicine should have in view the health and welfare of future generations. Their well-being and flourishing are dependent on how we organize our healthcare systems today. I end this brief presentation the same way that I ended my paper, with an eloquent and poignant passage from Laudato Si. We can no longer speak of sustainable development apart from intergenerational solidarity. Once we start to think about the kind of world we are living to the future generations, we look at things differently. We realize that the world is a gift which we have freely received and must share with others. Intergenerational solidarity is not optional, but rather a basic question of justice, since the world we have received also belongs to those who follow us. Thank you very much.
John, can you sit up there? Okay, questions time. First the speakers, one finger, my finger. Okay, so John first. I think he's trying to get this one. Yes. Yes.
Okay, I just want to say thank you, John, for bringing up that important subject, which of course raises many issues about.
May I interrupt? For some reasons, I can't hear very well. Can you please adjust the audio if possible? Thanks.
It takes a while. Can you hear me now?
I have a question.
What? No, okay, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Afterwards, okay.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. AB.
I wanted to say thank you to Roland for the kind of important gloss that he added to the subject. But the subject needs to be. You can't hear you, John. Well, why don't we get him a different microphone?
Can I suggest that maybe you use John's microphone? Because when he was making his presentation, it was very, very clear.
Is this better? This sounds better to me. Can you hear me, Roland, now?
It's very echoey. And your words get lost. Yeah.
Look, I'm just gonna talk, okay? So I just wanted to say thank you, John and Roland. It's an important conversation. It's terribly complicated because doctors, by law, are required to put the interest of their patients first. And once you go there, it completely disrupts public health approaches, which presumably this could be. So anyway, end of comment.
Okay, so it's just a comment.
Yeah, just a comment. Thank you.
Okay. Jonathan has one finger question.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Dr. Appleby. Thank you for your interesting paper, and it is very clear. But I have a question as to your principle of environmental beneficence. Your principle have two goals, right? The first is to maximize benefit to the environment, and the second one is sufficiently meet the health needs of patients, right? I wonder how to apply this. I would like to give a test to this principle. Consider how the Minister of Finance applies the principles when he or she compiles the national budget. Should he allocate all resources to these two goals? Maximize the benefit to the environment and meet the health needs of patients? Should he allocate all the resources or monetary resources to these two goals?
So
if not, then I wonder I wonder whether this principle is a sufficient one or not, or it may be it need to be constrained by some other consideration.
Thank you very much for the question. And to also just say thank you, Roland, for the response. That was wonderful. So get a little closer to the microphone here. I think it's so obviously it's super oversimplified in the way I've presented it. But the idea would be that we do it would take creating a different approach to the way we typically have come to practice medicine is really a shifting culture is what I'm looking for. And it is that we would basically identify what the sufficient needs of each patient are. And of course, this would go beyond just what is medically necessary. We would take into consideration their interests, the particular aspects of a doctor-patient relationship. So maybe there's something, I'll just give an example of like for a psychiatric patient, they feel that they need kind of like human touch. That's something that's been cited in psychiatric literature. So maybe, not having a Zoom call, for example, that would be different for that patient. The Minister of Health, for example, would continue to, I think right now they basically aim to satisfy health needs already. And then there would have to be, still this kind of gray area wiggle room surrounding what constitutes this kind of extra sufficiency for each patient. But we would probably have to think more carefully about the guidelines for costing that we have. We would also need to consider what the more general costs environmentally are and whether there's going to be regulatory constraints that are likely going to be imposed by the government as well, with potential financial costs too. So I appreciate I'm giving a super vague answer to this, but the costings will have to be based on probably some additional research to figure out exactly where the new baseline is for meeting patient needs. And quite frankly, we've really not been doing any of that research. So I feel like I kind of muddled that question's answer for you, but that's my best.
Okay, 5 finger, you have 1 finger? Okay, so basically, I think Chris is number 1, David, and then Audit, and then Paul. Okay. Maybe you can have, okay, you just.
Should I? Can everybody hear me on Zoom too?
Yes.
All right. So thank you very much for your paper, John, and for your comment, Roland. My question is 2-part, but it's very related. So to what extent do you think we focus on cures a lot of the times, right? Or mitigation, palliation. To what extent do you believe that in the reforms you propose, medicine will have to turn towards preventative medicine? And to that extent, to what extent will environmental justice concerns have to be incorporated into the medical paradigm? And what I have in mind here is to what extent then will medicine have to be very consciously aware of aspects of its own industries that are functioning on a profit motive, right? So in the United States, that's healthcare delivery. In other places where there's socialized medicine, it's still big pharma, right? The med tech industries that are profit motive, and which create pollution. So if a big chemical and pharmaceutical industry is polluting an area, right? Yes, we could say that causes diseases such as cancers and such. But I mean, if you're practicing medicine with a cure in mind, having the chemical industry, pollute groundwater could be quite profitable for you as a physician later on, or as a hospital. So that's kind of the background. I don't want to take up too much time, but to what extent both will the reforms necessitate, right, both preventative models as well as a true engagement with environmental justice? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm sure Roland can also comment on this too. I'll just take a brief stab at it, which is I think what needs to happen generally here is the integration across a number of different industries as part of this preventative approach. Everything from zoonotic disease transmission to the fact that the evidence now shows that, there's tens and tens and tens of thousands of health deaths caused by just air pollution alone, each year in, for example, the UK. So, and then there's the conflict of interest that you talk about in other systems where someone can make a profit by making people sick and then getting them better. And so that would be where there would need to be governance to bring those threads together, I think. But this is taking a much broader view outside of just this small encapsulated world of medicine. And I think what Roland said was super important, which was that guidelines devised by expertise, if I've understood him correctly, would need to inform this to fill in the knowledge gaps. And I'm not sure if you have anything you want to add on that, Roland. I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because I don't think we can see medicine, the practice of medicine, or even institutions that are practicing medicine in isolation from the larger society and the larger ecosystem of economics, politics, and so on and so forth. So I think it is very, very important to see this as an integrated whole. And although our focus here is on a medical practice, I think at the back of our minds, we must always understand that there's politics involved, there's economics involved, and all these things have to be taken into consideration as well. And that is why I feel that perhaps a more an institutionalized, an approach that centers on the institution, right, would go some way to address some of these issues, right? The way in which medicine is understood, maybe wrapped up in a business model, for example, right, also have implications on how medicine has not been practiced in a sustainable way, right? When there are bottom lines, there are profit issues and so on that loom large, in the practice and the delivery of healthcare. So it is a much larger problem, and that is why one aspect of my paper, I don't want to sound like a pessimist here, but I felt that maybe environmental beneficence may be a little bit too optimistic, a little bit too triumphalistic even, right? Maybe we should try to govern the delivery of healthcare in such a way that it does not cause harm. I think if we can achieve that, that's already a Herculean task, to run healthcare in such a way that it does not cause harm, right? And then maybe we can consider ways in which it can cause the environment and the natural world order to flourish, right? Because the problems are immense, the obstacles are huge, some of them almost insurmountable, right? So maybe we can work towards practicing medicine in such a way that it does not cause harm to the environment, right? And then we can start to think of how we can practice medicine to cause the environment to flourish.
Thank you both. Thank you both for the presentation and the critique. I must say in the beginning that I'm fully on the side of Roland on this issue. I think I'll go even further than his critique. As a patient, I don't want to engage with my family doctor on environmental issues at all. I don't want it to be raised. And further, I don't want my doctor to raise these questions when I'm in deep trouble and need treatment. And that's beyond the time allocated for our meeting. It's something which has to do inherently with the doctor-patient relationship and trust. I think a way to undermine the trust is that you are aware that the doctor takes seriously environmental concerns. So that's one point. The other point is that as a teacher of bioethics for students, I always emphasize the need for a division of labor between the ethics of doctor-patient relationship and the ethics of public health. The ethics of institutions, the hospital administration and the Ministry of Health. I want them to take responsibility for all these concerns and it might not be the most efficient way, but I think that the medical relationship should be given priority over other social concerns. In the same way, I don't want my doctor to take the costs of my treatment, the economic costs, as his part of his job. So I don't, and leave it to the government. So I don't want, in the case of environmental concerns, and really for a strict division of labor between the two levels of the personal medicine and the public health situations.
Okay, any other questions related to what comments? Okay, your comment.
David said word for word what I intended to say. So I just want to add two strong examples about the risk of taking the route at the level, individual level of physician relationship. We recently in Canada decriminalized medical assistance in dying, and now every patient in Canada has the right to ask his or her physician to aid at the end of life. And this raised for many patients the fear that doctors will assist them not because of their best interest, or that this will be pushed upon them rather than asked by them to save money to the healthcare system. And the second example is the triage protocols during the COVID pandemic. In many countries, it was suggested that not everybody will be able to be treated, and that caused public panic, of course. So every time we see these considerations trickle down to the level of individual care, the trust is indeed being destroyed almost instantly. So I just wanted to strengthen your argument with these two examples.
Well, I think that's the reason why you should keep a very strict acoustic separation between public health concerns, even in times of pandemic, and the individual treatment of the doctor. That's my whole point. That applies also to the emergency times of the pandemic.
John, you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted a brief little gloss on the discussion between public health and clinical health. The issue is, and environmental health and falling under a broad definition of public health. For the policymaker, it's who do you sacrifice? The physician cannot by law sacrifice his patient because then the physician is committing malpractice. That norm is extremely unlikely to get very eroded, even by pressures. You know, there will be structural pressures on the norm, but you know, what David said, describes the reason it's going to remain a powerful norm very clearly. But once you go into the higher order statistical realm, statistical evaluation, the decision is how many people are you going to sacrifice? You're going to be picking different kinds of options based on a kind of sacrificial model, because public health is about sacrifice. It's for the benefit of the greater good, and therefore you justify injuring people or letting people be injured by inactivity or something.
Okay, John.
Well, so I just want to say, first of all, these are excellent points, and you know, Roland's brought up some excellent points as well. And I hear you, John. This is. My view is that we don't have to descend into malpractice territory. We can do good medical practice, but we can integrate into our decision-making at all three levels that I mentioned in the paper. I talked about one of those levels here, to actually give environmental sustainability some priority. So, you know, that would be where we would set the line as sufficiency. But let me give you some examples of where we would maybe have decisions. So maybe I'll give you the example of the UK's NHS healthcare service. So one of the things that didn't exist was they didn't know how much anesthetic gases they were using. There was no data on it. Turns out anesthetic gases are one of the most worst things for the, our atmosphere that we have. So one of the first things the NHS can do is figure out how much gases they're doing, and they're working on it. They haven't quite figured it out. But in some cases where I've spoken with hospitals, it's turned out that they barely used any. In fact, no one was even keeping track. And it was actually just everything that they were saving, not using, was just being released back into the atmosphere, just because of procedurally. So that is one clear area that is probably happening at lots of hospitals, can easily be addressed. At the much larger institution, then at individual institutions, you're going to have different kinds of populations you're servicing. You might make decisions based on their, so let's say, online consultations versus not, based on people's needs. So other decisions can be made there, as they are currently for all kinds of different treatments. We make decisions all kinds of ways at the kind of known as a trust level. So we make decisions based on individual kind of populations, clinic served, and then at the larger governmental level. And then at the individual level, here's another example. Turns out that, again, one of the worst culprits for climate change in medicine is inhalers. And there's two different kinds of inhalers. One really doesn't hurt the environment at all, which is a powder inhaler, and the other one is gaseous. And this really comes down to personal preference to a great extent, because they're both pretty efficacious. And this is, in my mind, where a conversation can happen between a doctor and a patient. You might have, I think we need to integrate into a patient's idea of what a patient's interests are, that they might be interested in undergoing treatment that doesn't damage the environment, in line with the fact that they do a lot of other lifestyle things that might not be environmentally destructive. So you might say to them, hey, look, you can have an inhaler. One's worse for the environment if we give them to everyone, but if you take the powdered one, it might not be quite as great, you might not enjoy it quite as much, but it's part of a larger solution. How do you feel about this? Would you like to? We could try it. And that would be the kind of conversation, for example, that might happen where there's expertise has designated that as an optional kind of thing you talk about, just kind of like all kinds of other optional things that.
Doesn't you pressure the doctor or the patient?
Well, I think you would say this is it, but there's no, you can have whatever one you want. Yeah, and I would, just one other philosophical point, because aside from all this practical stuff, I'm still a philosopher. I would actually challenge the need for trust in medicine. I actually think what we're talking about is reliability. Trust is an effective attitude between two individuals. And I don't think what you're mostly talking about actually obtains on that criteria. I think most of what you're talking about is reliability. And I think there's been an overemphasis of the fact that trust exists. I'm not saying we shouldn't aspire to it, but I don't think what we're pointing to. So just to throw another wrench in the things.
The triple here is much more, coming from a medical point of view, easy to use, but it's about 6 times more expensive than the inhaler. And then that's the main reason Dr. described the buffer.
Right.
And,
yeah.
And triple inhaler. Because it's actually very easy. It's more efficacious too, because it goes into the lung easier, but that's a cost issue.
That is a cost issue.
Will you sacrifice some convenience on behalf of the greater good? It is sacrificial.
Okay. Hello. To what extent do you think is it at all possible for diversification of options for the patient being prescribed, for instance, in the NHS? Currently, doctors cannot prescribe any medicines that are not pharmaceutical, which is limiting the patient's choice very much. And they have to go to private sources to get anything else. And plant medicine, for instance, would be a lot less damaging to the environment, but they cannot ever prescribe it. And only a few doctors might tell you, oh, you can actually take these vitamins or minerals to help your health. You may have a deficiency in this. They don't know much about nutrition. They have less than 1 week training in their whole 7 years of training on nutrition. So preventative medicine would be a great idea and would save a lot of damage to the environment from the production of pharmaceutical products. So it should be in some kind of, at some level, more choice should be given to the patient. And I think the problem is that there's a lot of money pushing pharmaceutical products to doctors as the first option and the only option that they can prescribe. And there's not much money pushing plant medicine or nutrition or food as medicine. And this is something that needs to change if we want to improve the effect on the environment of our decisions and how to treat ourselves.
But I think it's a common.
I agree. I mean, I agree that they need nutrition training. That's a huge omission of medical training.
So there's Paul, and then Colleen, and then David. Does it work? Okay, keep it on. Don't turn it off. Okay. My question actually goes to the whole value of the metaphysical framework in terms of looking at the effectiveness of a practical, one of the huge problems that you've raised, John, and I have to admit, having had the benefit of the conversation with you last night, and you really impressed me by how huge a problem it is. And I would like to suggest that actually it's politics rather than religion that's significant. And all of the big changes that have happened in medical practice have come about as a result of scandal of some kind. Nuremberg, in my part of the world, Australia, deep sleep therapy leading to people dying, led to a whole change in regulation. In New Zealand, scandal with withholding treatment to women diagnosed with carcinoma in situ led to a radical shift in their regulatory program. And I noticed that in Roland's commentary, he refers to Pope Francis, but if you look at his comments, they're actually political, not religious. So my question is, how do you go about making this a scandal if you've got material there?
Yeah.
And effecting change at a political level rather than worrying too much about the philosophy or the metaphysics.
I think we're live on YouTube, so I gotta watch what I say. All I'd say is that I think it just takes people looking. So right now, no one was really looking. So once people start looking, the facts are going to quickly unearth themselves in terms of this extent of the of what's going on globally, quite frankly. And obviously, it's very out of style to be environmentally, politically out of style to be environmentally irresponsible. So I think that will happen. There's going to be obviously whistleblowing that will likely happen as well. Especially I think even if you weren't motivated by the environmental side of it, when you recognize the financial waste that occurs alongside the environmental destruction, I think that will also be a potentially politically scandalous. So maybe Roland has something to add to that, or Jonathan Crane, do you?
Yeah. This was a great question here. I think the scandal is agnotological. I came across this term. Agnotology is the study of ignorance. And there has been a great realm of ignorance in the medical field about suppressing certain kinds of information from even being known or being studied. And John, you indicated this, that for many decades now, medicine has not looked at its environmental impact. And that was a strategic decision to keep certain information suppressed by not even looking or even asking those questions. And you used the term in the very early part of your presentation about denial, that there's denial that medicine has an environmental impact, which is itself an agnotological strategy. And so I'm wondering whether you could speak a little bit more about this impulse to suppress, deny, disavow, push away this information. And one of the other strategies that you talked about was medical exceptionalism. We do medicine to take care of these individual patients, and therefore this is unapplied to us. That is also another kind of agnotological strategy. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how this culture of reform, or reforming culture that you want to create here, how you're going to push against that kind of strategy.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Roland also has some thoughts on it, but a few things I'll just say is that, and going also, I just want to add that I recognize that there's like a big culture shift here, a problem that needs to be reconciled between the pressure placed on doctors and patients and everything like that. I don't want to gloss over that. But I mean, I think one part starts with educating students, for example, so that it makes it much more difficult for people to claim ignorance, be like, hey, I was never taught about this. You start by integrating it into a curriculum. So one thing did was I basically, I shouldn't say when I found this, there was no work. There was not enough work to actually teach the students for clinical ethics. That's what I found, or nothing that was substantive enough. There are people working on this, which I tried to include as much as possible, but we basically developed a curriculum for environmental sustainability. There was a clinician that talked about, for example, we taught some classes on just how things work in a clinic. I taught the regulation and law, and this became known as the Lancaster model. It's informed the GMC's national plan for sustainable medicine. For example, Oxford's taken on this model for their medical school. So we have kind of infiltrated some different avenues, and with the idea of kind of, this is a basic model you could use to teach your medical students as one possible strand of making it more difficult to plead ignorant on the issues. For, maybe people are going to come up with much better ways of doing this ethically, but it starts with people actually having that. And I think politically now, there's something called Greener NHS, for example, and they're trying to very quickly figure out what the data sets are. They're not quite there yet. I've seen the data, and figure out maybe where to go with the policy, but everyone's scrambling. And I think as more data becomes available, more people are working on it, it becomes increasingly more difficult to hide and kind of defend this kind of ignorance. That's the best I've got on this, and I don't want to shut Roland out of the conversation.
Okay, Roland, I have something to say.
Well, I agree with you, John. I think this is a systemic issue that has to be dealt with at that level. Although I'm not discounting the importance of training new doctors and healthcare workers to be more environmentally sensitive. So, for example, there is this data that's quite shocking. In 2012, the NHS produced 24.7 million tons of carbon emission. And someone has compared this with small countries in the world, and they found that it is equivalent to the carbon emission of the country of Croatia, the whole country of Croatia for that year. So this clearly is a systemic problem, right? So it has to be dealt with at that level in terms of policies, in terms of administration, in terms of strategies, and so on and so forth. And I think that is quite a Herculean task. And it's just one example out of many examples.
I think David has something to say. Do you have a question? Okay. Who has a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, so in this presentation,
in
this presentation, you talked a lot about patient safety and sustainability, but ethically, how do you integrate the safety and well-being of the NHS workers, the physicians and nurses that are working, and where do you fit that in the ethical framework?
I think that there obviously needs to be guidelines that are set for clinical practice in relation to any interventions for sustainability. So just like everything else, basically. And then also if a patient asks for something that they don't feel lives up to the necessary clinical guidelines and their duty of care, they would have to have a conversation and be like, sorry, I can't do that. These are the reasons why. And so it would need to basically happen like normal treatment conversation you would have with your doctors, how I envision it.
I was thinking more like along the lines of, let's say, COVID-19, where kind of masks and gloves are kind of the ways to protect workers from catching COVID and stuff like that. But equally, these kind of masks and gloves are damaging the environment. So within the ethical deliberation, how would you fit the safety of the clinical workers that are working?
I think you'll find my answer frustrating, which is that we basically have to set the basic thresholds that need to be met for the workers. So let's say, so right now, if we don't even take safety into consideration, I've written a paper about this. If you don't even take environmental sustainability into consideration during COVID, there was a hierarchy in which safety gear was given in medical interventions. The highest ranking and wealthiest, this was a finding in some UK hospitals, the wealthiest, highest paid, and highest ranking members of the hospital tend to get the most advanced respiratory and protective gear for surgeries and interventions, whereas, and this was kind of allocated down the pecking order in the hospital, not as a plan, but that's just what happened because of shortness of supplies. And so what happened was the people that tended to get paid less also had to fork out through their own money more protective gear. And so that was already a failing before environmental sustainability. So this is just something that I think healthcare systems need to improve on to meet the basic safety needs of all employees. And then you can work on the environmental concerns. And there are some other ways that people have done that, but I won't go on. I appreciate there's a time constraint.
Okay, 1 minute left. So
okay.
So I totally agree that the first step will be information and education for medical doctors. Second step probably will be in the medium long term to incorporate in informed consent information about this effect on the environment. And these two concrete things. And for me, the more, I would say, challenging is the emphasis you give in your formulation of the principle about the words, what you have to maximize and what you have to sufficiently take care. And probably if you center in the person, as also Roland mentioned, will be more easy also for medical doctors in the process of education to assume this humanistic approach in medicine that is now in contradiction with the protection of the environment. How to massage this statement to make more humanistic and not environmental? It is something extremely useful and necessary for the sustainable medical practice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I remember in medical school we taught that there's like exactly the preventive medicine is something that is very good for patient. It's primary care, secondary care, but then the problem is that most of the money is dedicated to tertiary care, which is like the end stage when you're in hospital, when you're sick, when you die, right? So that's what funding is. How do you redistribute that money so that it's based on like it's dedicated to education and diet and exercise and all that? It's such a difficult task because I think we've been struggling with that for like last 50 years. We know that for sure that if you put more money in that for patients with healthier lifestyle, then you would have less need for secondary and tertiary care. But then how do you do that? Because there's no, I don't know, economic benefit like from whatever company that's doing that, right? So that's always been a problem with medicine. So I don't know, it's in this way I think it's very similar. Both portions are sometimes see more hope in the environmental thing because it's more tangible, right? That this is damage there and people are more sensitive to this and to the portion about diet and exercise and clean air and all that. So anyway,
very good points.
Time's up, and we're now going for lunch, and we'll be back. Let's see what's the time. Let's see. Now it's 1 o'clock. 2:30. Yes, 2:30 is the next session. We will have the keynote speakers. Usually we have it in the morning. Usually the two keynote speakers are deferred to the afternoon because it's time difference. So we have keynote speakers until 2:30. We'll see you there and have a nice lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Roland. Thank you for all the questions.